Don James is called Chairman of the Board by his assistant coaches. He is known as one of the best organizers in coaching. In 1984, Don was named Best College Coach by the Miami Herald survey of former coaches, recruiting analysts, and over 40 football writers. Don began his football career as a high school quarterback at Massillon, Ohio, which was at the time considered the top high school football program in the country. After attending college at Miami of Florida and 2 years in the United States Army, he became a high school coach in Florida. Then he became a graduate assistant coach while getting a master's degree at the University of Kansas. Don was an assistant coach at Florida State, Michigan, and Colorado before his first head coaching job at Kent State. In 1972, Don's team won the first championship ever for Kent State in the highly regarded Mid-America Conference. In 1975, he became head coach at the University of Washington. Don has taken Washington to the Rose Bowl 3 times. He has also coached in the East-West Shrine Game, the Hula Bowl, and the Japan Bowl. One of his most memorable bowl victories was in the 1985 Orange Bowl, when the Huskies defeated Oklahoma 28-17, denying the Sooners the national championship. In the summer of 1983, Don organized a group of 47 mountain climbers to reach the top of Mount Rainier. This kicked off a fundraising effort for a Seattle group which used the money to finance a climb to the top of Mount Everest. I know you will enjoy Don's thoughts on leadership through organization. Don James.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to be able to take part in this series, and my topic is program development. If you're going to be given an opportunity to be over someone, to be their coach, to be their manager, be their leader, you really need to set forth some ideas in about 4 different areas, and I'm going to cover these areas. First of all, you have to decide the kind of manager that you want to be, the kind of coach. The second thing I think is important is normally once you get into that position of a manager, you have the opportunity to bring people in. You may be able to hire some people. I think you have to decide the kind of people that you want on your team. The third area that I'll touch on is an ability to set out some ideas on motivation, and I think that motivation is probably one of the most important areas that we will cover. Then, of course, the last thing is, now that you've got your team, your people under you, what are the ingredients of developing this organization or this team? So I'll cover the Husky approach to those 4 areas. Now let's start with deciding on what kind of manager we want to be. There was a great football player named Jack Tatum that played for Ohio State and played for the Oakland Raiders. And about the end of his career, he wrote a book. It had an excellent title. They Call Me Assassin. He was a very aggressive player, obviously, but in that book, he was asked by his co-author as to what he thought the ingredients were for a good coach. So he's listed 4 points, and I think they're just outstanding. The first point is a good coach ought to have compassion for his players. And you've got to recognize that people are in the trenches, that people are doing the hard work. They've got feelings, and you've got to realize and remember what you went through when you were at that level. I think in terms of communication is one of the key issues here. Can you just imagine one of your players coming in and looking at the bulletin board in the locker room and finding out firsthand that he's not on the team, or he's not made the trip, or he's not going to a postseason game? And so I believe that players should be let down in conference. You should communicate. You should always let them know where they stand and what they're doing good, as well as what they have to work on to improve. So compassion, I think, is a very key ingredient. Now, the second point that Jack made was a point called fairness, that we have an obligation to be fair to our players. And I think that's very true, but I think it's also important that our players, or the people under us, understand that fairness for one is fairness for all. So the approach we take with this is we can compare it with just going to practice and working. And say I've got one group of players that are out there, maybe the linebackers are working extremely hard and they're really going after it, and they're getting a lot accomplished. Or maybe on the other end of the field, there's the defensive backs, and they're doing a lot of standing around. It appears as though they're not very well motivated. They're not working very hard. And so I think you'd have to be fair to one. You'd have to go down and congratulate the linebackers, and to be fair to the other, you'd have to go down and get on the defensive back. So I think it's important that you are fair, and that the players really have to know what they expect from a standpoint of fairness. The third thing is getting into it a little bit more, getting into the coaching end of it. Is simply do not disintegrate under pressure. And how many times have we seen in critical times in a sporting event where the television cameras will pan down to the sideline and you'll see a coach maybe throwing a chair, maybe losing all of his control. And what have we managers and leaders said to our players in meetings? We say, we've got to have our poise. We can never lose it. We've got to be under control. And so I think if we tend to disintegrate under pressure, we've now given all of the people under us the right to also disintegrate and to lose control. So I think that this, again, is a very important point in deciding on what kind of a coach or manager we're going to be. Now, the fourth thing is something that a lot of people don't worry about or don't think about, but the point is have the ability to look into tomorrow. And I really believe that the decisions that we're making today are going to determine our success in 87, 88, and 89. And I'm sure it's that way in industry and business. Again, I can go back to our situation. We've just completed another recruiting class. I don't think there's any question that these 17, 18-year-olds that are going into college right now, they're going to determine who's employed in 3 or 4 years, how many of us have a job. There's another important point, too, and that's research and change and make moves in personnel. I've got to groom a quarterback. I've got to groom linebackers. If you don't have a fullback, you better get somebody in there that is ready to take over when your senior graduates. You've just got to make sure that you cover yourself with all personnel, and I think grooming young coaches, you're getting them prepared to move up the ladder, maybe move up into coordinator positions. So that ability to look into tomorrow is a real key factor in deciding what kind of a manager or coach you want to be. Normally when you get the position where you can manage people, you also get involved with personnel, and you have the right and the ability to then start bringing people on the job. In other words, you have some say into the selection of who's going to be on this team. And we have a lot of standards. In intercollegiate sports, we obviously have to take the academic standards. We've got to make sure that the player can get into college, that he's admissible, that maybe he has the ability to stay in school and get his degree. We all are working along those lines. But what I'm really getting down to is getting a little deeper and getting into the character of a player and learning a lot more about the kind of people that you bring in your program. So the way we do it, first of all, we've identified a series of questions that we want to address to people that have been working with these 17 and 18-year-old players. Say his coach, maybe his principal, maybe the coach that coaches at the school across town that has watched this player grow and develop from a different angle. So we have this series of questions that must be asked and answered by people that have knowledge of the player that we're trying to evaluate. Now, the first obvious question is going to be simply, Coach, can this young man be a great college player? And what we've found over the years that nearly every high school coach feels as though he has a player or two that could play for you. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for someone that can come in and help win for us, a player that can play on a championship team. Now, once we put that question to test, we will ask the second part of that question, is this young man dying to be a great college player? Again, we've recognized the fact that there are a lot of talented people out there in all walks of life, and for some reason, some achieve and some do not. And we just feel like a real important characteristic for a young person is that he's got to have a burning desire to be as good as he can possibly become. The third area gets into toughness, and we're a contact sport, so we're going to ask if this youngster is tough physically and is he tough mentally. We're going to have documented evidence, probably through film or videotape, or maybe we watched him play, and we know that the young man will go up and he'll go hit people and he's aggressive. The mental toughness is just as important. Dr. Robert Schuller, the minister from Los Angeles, has written a book, Tough Times Don't Last, Tough People Do. And the point that he was trying to make is that we're all going to have tough times. Not everybody's going to be able to weather those storms, but the tough people do. The people that take those problems and turn them into opportunities. If I go out and hire an assistant coach or a secretary, that she's got to have some toughness. Can you imagine sitting at her desk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Alumni are there trying to get into practice. The coaches are trying to get their practice plan. She's going about 4 or 5 different directions at the same time, and your secretary probably has to be as tough mentally as anyone in your program. Now, the fourth area is this team player concept, and basically we ask the question, will he play any position to help the team succeed? And team players are going to be invaluable. And conversely, that youngster or that person that comes into your program that says, no, I just want to be left half, or I'm going to take my ball and go home, well, you're going to have some problems with them, because left half may not be the best position for that individual, and there's no way of knowing that until you get them on your team. And So we've just found that the real team players are the ones that are going to help us succeed. And well, I can remember Jack Lambert played defensive end and was in his second year of college, and we were having a struggle on defense, and I went into the staff and said, we've got to take our best football player and put him at middle linebacker where he can get more done and get to the ball. And so we called Jack in and said, Jack, you're in your 7th or 8th game, and you've mastered your position. You're one of the few guys out there that's playing well. But would you object to playing middle linebacker, because I think that it could make our team better? And he said, Coach, I'll play any place. It was his answer basically is, I'll play any position to help the team. And, and I can think of an Anthony Allen that came in. We recruited him as a wide receiver, a defensive back, and just as soon as he got on campus, we had some injuries at quarterback, and we had to call Anthony in and ask him if he had played quarterback for a year. And then he had to play quarterback for the second year. And then our team got a little better depth at that position, and I called Anthony in and said, Anthony, I really think that you could be a good college quarterback, but I think maybe you could be a professional wide receiver or defensive back. And now I'm going to give you the opportunity to make your choice. So he picked wide receiver, and it's really worked out for him. He's got 2 or 3 years in now in the professional football leagues. The next question that is important is, will this young man come early and stay late to improve? And again, it's just a point that none of us are really there, that we're always constantly striving to improve, and the person that's going to be the clock watcher is probably not going to get the job done. And we're going to set up a structured program. We're going to set up standards, but in most cases, they're minimum standards. And for the individual to really improve and become the best that he can become, he's going to have to get out there early some days, and he's going to have to stay late. And I reflect back to an athlete we had at Colorado, Bobby Anderson. Bobby was a great player, but we played Air Force at the close, the last game of Bobby's junior year. Went into the locker room after the game, and Coach Crowder had a meeting with him. And most of the players and coaches started to get showered and dressed, and the media people were trying to find Bobby to interview him and talk to him about the game. And they couldn't find him, and someone finally suggested, have you looked in the weight room? And it was incredible to me, but 30 minutes after the last game of his junior year, he was in the weight room working out in preparation for his senior year. Now, that's the kind of an individual that you're really looking for, and those are the kind of players that you really do get the most out of them, and that you get the best that they've got. Now, the next question is an important area, and the question is simply, is he a leader? And so many times the high school coaches will look at you and say, well, he's not a leader, but would you not recruit him because he's not a leader? And really what we're trying to find out here is he the locker room lawyer type? Is he the negative leader? I really don't care if he's a leader. Some of the greatest leadership I've ever seen will come from the doers, the players that go out there and they keep their mouths shut, but they do their job, and they're the hardest workers and they're the toughest competitors. But the key issue here is we want to find out if this young man might come in and help tear down the program by being so negative. The next question simply, is he a good citizen? And again, we're looking for people with character. We're looking for good young people, people that will come in and not be disruptive. We're not looking for hoods and thieves. We want to work with good, solid young people. Next area is, again, one of those areas that would be very obvious, and that's the injury factor. And it's amazing to me how many people will hide injuries. If we ask a particular coach, well, is this young man injured or has he ever been injured? Then they've got to look at you and make a decision. Either got to tell you the truth or they've got to lie. But if you don't ask that question, a lot of them will just pass that over. We had a player on our team in 1985 that had a knee problem. We took him in for arthroscopic surgery. Our team doctor found that he had a torn cruciate, and we went back to the family, and they said, yes, he tore that in high school, and we just kept it quiet, and they really wanted to keep it quiet from the NFL teams. But the important thing, had we known that, we could have done a much better job in treating and handling and taping the particular athlete. And the last question is, this young man a competitor? Of all the traits, my experience tells me the great competitors will do a couple things for you. Number one, they'll help you defeat people that you probably shouldn't defeat. And the other thing is they keep you from being upset. Again, I go back to the athletes that I've coached, and I don't think there was ever a greater competitor than Jack Lambert. And there was just never any question about what Jack was going to be doing every day of the week. If you put him out there in a practice situation, he was going to do everything he could to win the battles. There are a lot of games that we had success in because of the competitive makeup of a Jack Lambert, and I can think of many other athletes as I consider that point. We've decided the kind of coach that you want to be, and we've decided the kind of people that you want to have in your program. Before they get there, I think you have to make some decisions on motivation. Lee Iacocca in his book said basically that when it comes to making the place run, motivation is everything. And I look at motivation as probably the biggest job that I have. I've got a large staff of coaches, graduate assistants, a large team. We've got managers, trainers, and I just feel like I've got to do the best that I can to motivate everyone to get everything we've got out of each individual. So what we've done is, philosophically, I've sat down and I've put down some ideas that I believe in for motivation. You say, well, why do you need to tell everybody about that? I said, well, I think the important thing is that your team changes and your staff changes. And if I particularly am not a fear and intimidation motivator, and I go out and hire a young coach, and he comes in and starts rattling some headgears and swearing at players to try and get them to play and strong-arming them, and I've seen players get kicked by coaches. I think it's important that they understand that coming in, that this is the basic philosophy of the program. And so these are the points that we feel are important. The first thing I think you've got to let people know is that they will be coached enthusiastically and aggressively. And so we've got times out there when we're preparing on a goal line, say, with 5 minutes to go in practice for a difficult offense, maybe an SC is coming at you, and you just can't be kind and peaceful and quiet. You've got to be aggressive, and you've got to always maintain a high level of enthusiasm. We want people to understand that. The second point is the treatment of everyone in our program, and I really believe you're motivated primarily by the way you're treated. And we have a simple philosophy of, hey, we are one family. We're one team. We don't have a group of coaches up here on the pedestal and players down here in the trenches pulling and tugging in different directions. And so if you ever have any question about how you treat the people under you, treat them as though they're a member of your family. The third area is discipline. Again, this doesn't mean that we're going to have a gun to people's heads and put that kind of pressure on them. We're not going to determine between misdemeanors and felonies and have a series of penalties for all the crimes. We just feel like if we're going to have a disciplined team, we're going to have to basically have a disciplined program. I think that gets down to everything you do in your total philosophy. If the bus is supposed to leave, for instance, at 8:30 to go to the airport, and it, in effect, leaves at 8:45, I think you've lost some discipline. People will feel like, well, he really doesn't mean what he says about 8:30. I can come at 8:40 if I want. I can be a little bit late. When you do that, then you breed a little undisciplined attitudes within your squad. And so we just have the feeling that our players will never have to wait on us as coaches. They'll never have to sit and be bored in our meetings. I tell our players that our meetings will go up to 30 minutes. Very seldom, if ever, will you ever have to sit in a meeting that lasts longer than that. The next area is an area that gets into confidence, and I've always questioned, how can this football team of ours, for instance, go out and open up with an Ohio State and expect to be competitive against Ohio State if they don't go into the game with confidence. The best way to show confidence in your athletes is show improvement through statistics. We do so much charting and timing and measuring in sports that it's an easy thing to do. We set up a player profile when the athlete comes into our program and chart him through his career so that he can say maybe after 6 months, this is doing me some good. I've gone into that weight room and I've gained 30 pounds on my bench press, or I've gained 50 pounds on my squats, overhead presses. These are the things that we're showing them that they are getting quicker, they're getting faster, they're getting stronger, so that they can be motivated to go out and hopefully go into a big game against a tough opponent with some confidence. The next area is a difficult word called love. First of all, you've got to let your players know that you love them. You've got to be totally honest with you. And I've heard some of the great coaches in our times, the Bear Bryants, the Don Shulas, the Vince Lombardis, the one point that is consistent is that they love their players even though they may be aggressive with them. Show them that love and respect. From that standpoint, you're going to get a lot more out of your athletes. The last thing is just simply no special deals. Don't spoil them. There's no way that you can have a team concept if one player knows that another player is getting a little bit more, or he's getting out of things, or he doesn't have to run wind sprints, or he doesn't have to go to the weight room. And the important thing for us is that they're all treated alike. Now that we've covered up the ways of motivation, in our opinion, we're down to the final area. And here, we're going to build a squad. We're going to try to get teamwork. There are 5 ingredients, and I'll simply go over these with the athletes in the fall and spring, at least twice a year, because we're all going to be on teams, and we've all got to make our contribution to our team, whether it's business or church or a team in sports. These are the ingredients that we think are important to developing a good, solid team. The first point is hustle. If you don't hustle and give 100%, then you haven't made your full contribution to your team. The other important point is that you've got a lot of young players on your team or people new to your program. They say, well, I can sit back and cool it for a year or so. I'll get my chance when I'm a junior and senior. And I think the flaw there is, if you don't give 110% now, by the time you're a junior and senior, you will not have paid the price, and you will not make a contribution then. The second point is this point of courage, and again, we're a contact sport. If we have a group of players that have respect for each other because of their courage, We will fight harder for each other. It gets back to maybe the foxhole theory, that if you're in a battle and you have to jump in a foxhole with someone, who do you want? You want the Jack Lamberts. You want the toughest people you can get in there with you because your life's on the line. We also tell our athletes that courage off the field is probably going to be more difficult than on the field. We've all recognized that the psychologists tell us that peer pressure is the greatest pressure that any young person has. I simply say this: if that is the truth, you better sit down at night and take a piece of paper out, and you better decide where your peers are going to take you, number one, and number two, where you're going to take them. And you can get into a lot of things, but you have, by nature of being on this intercollegiate football team, you are a leader whether you want to be or not. And someone's going to look up to you, and you've got to just decide if you're going to be leading people to church or the classroom or the library or the weight room, or you're going to be taking them to the fraternity parties or the drug parties or the beer joints. And then after you've decided where you're going to take people, I think you better decide where you're going to let people take you and what are the limits to what you're going to do. And there are cases every year where 3 or 4 or 5 youngsters get in a car and the driver's intoxicated and he's going too fast, and you've got to make a decision then that you're going to get out of that situation before you let somebody go so far as to even killing you. So again, we feel like the more courage we've got within this team, the harder we're going to play for each other. The third thing is relatively simple, and it's the mental part of it. It's knowing the assignments. Physical mistakes don't hurt our business, and they don't hurt most other businesses, but the mental mistakes are the ones that really destroy us, and they prevent us from having much of a chance to succeed. Now, the fourth thing in these 5 ingredients to the squad development is just an ability to care about winning. And if we've got a room full of people, a team full of people that have the ability to put the team goals ahead of personal and individual goals, that we've got an excellent chance to be successful. And again, as I've traveled around the country over the years, the great organizations, the successful organizations are those that are just filled with people that can put the team concept ahead of the individual. And then the last point is loyalty. Loyalty, if you go out and have success day in and day out and never lose, it's really not much of a problem. But if you have the tough times that Dr. Schuler talked about in his book, you're going to have some loyalty problems. And I think you're going to need loyal people, because the first thing that will happen when you have tough times is people will start questioning. In a sport like football, we're going to get it from the media, we're going to get it from the fans, the alumni, and sometimes you get it from within. It's easier to point your finger and, well, I did my job, but if tailbacks would have found the holes, we would have probably won that game, or if we hadn't fumbled. The key issue there is it's a point that you need to talk about. Our players need to understand about loyalty, and I look at loyalty a little bit like religion, and if we're going to get better at it, we're going to have to work at it. We're going to have to make that a characteristic and a human trait. The key issue, again, is just don't let people say negative things about your teammates or about your team or about your coaches. You stand up and say, no, sir, that's not right. You don't understand that that particular tailback maybe had a bruised hand, or maybe he played with a broken wrist, or maybe he had the flu all week. Again, you just let people know that there were extenuating circumstances, but you stand up for those people that are on your team. Those are the things that I really wanted to talk to you about today. It's a real pleasure and a thrill for me to be a part of this program, and I just hope that there's something in these 4 areas that might be of help to you. Thank you.